Everyone's a critic, or so goes the sarcastical saying. And it seems that today, everyone is. What was once the sole province of a select group of scribes setting down their influential judgments about theater has now been joined by a chorus, as some would say a cacophony, of opinions sounding across the blogosphere. Tweets, Facebook postings, blogs, chat rooms. The beneficial and/or deleterious effects this has had on theater and theater criticism is our topic for today. I'm Pacheco of New York One and the Los Angeles Times for the American Theater Wing, and I'm delighted to be moderating this discussion with a quartet who is especially qualified to speak about those changes. I am joined by three major theater critics: Charles Isherwood of the New York Times, Elizabeth Vincentelli of the New York Post, and Peter Marks of the Washington Post. Rounding out our panel is Lisa Fung, the former arts and culture editor of the Los Angeles Times, who is now the executive editor of The Wrap, a leading news website covering entertainment, business, and culture. Welcome all.
Thank you.
There are over 133 theater blogs out there, and your British peer, Michael Billington of The Guardian, recently said that the social media has given, quote, newspaper critics a necessary kick up the bum, unquote. Do you feel that kick up the bum, Peter Marks, and is it necessary?
Yeah, I do. I think it's, I think it's a more entertaining world than it was 20 years ago, writing about the theater. And I think that actually, I don't feel threatened by those changes. I actually sort of have come to understand that it's a completely evolving world every year practically, and that I have to adapt to this world. It's not so much now readers have to adapt to what newspapers do. It's quite the other way around. And I think generally it's been good for us.
I also really enjoy it. I like argument, I like discussion, I like getting into the ring, I like all that. I think it's really healthy. Not always polite, but not always informed, but I think it's challenging. I like it. I really enjoy it.
Charles, what are the challenges for you in this change?
Well, reading all 133 of those blogs is not easy. It takes a lot of time. In fact, I don't obviously read them all. There's certain things that you obviously do check out. But the challenges are actually, trying to figure out how, criticism is going to need to change. I mean, I think right now there's so much pressure to do more online, and there's a bit of a devaluation of the print because everyone thinks the future is digital. And does that mean we're going to need to write shorter, write reviews in a different format? I know that Frank Rizzo, who writes for the Hartford Courant, is doing his reviews in a very different way, where it's like a bullet point thing, which I live in fear of. But I think we're definitely going to have to see how things shake out in the next 10 years. I mean, it's already been, even in the 8 years I've been at the Times, it's changed drastically. So I feel that we're still in the middle of it, but it's only going to get more complicated.
Lisa, you're in a unique position to comment on this because obviously for many years you edited theater reviewers at the Los Angeles Times, the print version of it. You then jumped to obviously total online content. Do you have a theater critic at The Wrap?
We don't.
And why not?
We just launched into culture in September. So we're kind of still soft introducing it. And at the moment, we just don't have a theater critic.
Do you think that you will? What are some of the discussions there about having a theater critic? Do you think you need one?
We've talked about it. The difference that we have, apart from what you do, is that we are national. As online, we're everywhere. So we're not speaking to one audience. So if we were to review only in New York or only in LA or only in Chicago or something, it's a little bit more of a challenge to do that and to have a network of people takes time to develop.
You brought up a good point, and that is the size of your audience, which I think is one of the biggest changes altogether. It seems to me that it used to be that you would write a review for the New York Times or the Post or the Washington Post, and it would be for the Washington Post readers plus whoever heard about it somehow. Now, do you sense that you have a national audience? Do you sense that you have a global audience?
Well, definitely. I think the New York Times actually has more readers outside New York City than it does in New York City now. And there's a lot of pressure. I mean, they're going to be putting a lot of emphasis on the international edition now. I mean, I think that's where they see the growth is. And of course, obviously, online makes it all that much easier for people to access the material. So I think it's actually very good in that way. I'm sure your papers are doing the same thing. I mean, that's...
Well, one of the ironies is that more people are reading us than ever before, as our sort of core paying audiences sort of retrench. Maybe, you know, the Times has introduced a paywall in this sort of building in another way. The Washington Post is doing that soon too. But the odd thing is that we're being read by more and more people in more and more parts of the world through tons of platforms. It's at the Washington Post, the majority of readers, when they're reading articles, don't know they're at the Washington Post websites because the portals are from everywhere.
Right.
They're all being linked from other things, so you don't even know. People do not enter the Washington Post more times than they do from outside the paper and just sort of happen to fall, trip over an article they've been linked to.
Well, I think that reflects actually an evolution of Broadway in particular, because Broadway now is trying to establish itself as a national brand. When you get Scarlett Johansson in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, you're obviously trying to create some kind of national interest because you're banking on tourist business. So you're trying to get that reach. And I get emails from people who are not from the tri-state area, and they're all about Broadway, of course. So that's part of what we cover, which is, you know, I mean, of course, New York theater is not just Broadway, and Broadway is not New York theater, but it's a really very visible part of it. And in that, the kind of borderless aspect of the net is really important because that's where Broadway is going. Broadway is selling itself as a national brand.
Go ahead.
I think that the interesting thing that I was noticing when I was still at the Times was that there was kind of a movement toward hyper-local because of the reach of the internet and bringing news. They were finding that people were looking for very local news, not necessarily the national news, because they could read Peter in Washington, Charles and Elizabeth in New York. And so there was a movement to kind of really localize and take a look at things that I think in print, for the print readers, that's what they were looking for.
Which I was going to bring this up later, but I might as well bring this up now, given the fact that there are all these portals and people don't know where exactly they're coming into. That does that mean a diminution of the brand, of your own personal brand, the Peter Marks brand, the Charles Isherwood brand, the Elizabeth Gentelli brand?
No, I think it's the other way. I think it's to some degree, it's a lessening of the brand of the place you work for, and it's more focused on the individual. And I know Elizabeth is on Twitter, Lisa's on Twitter. I don't think you do any of the social media.
I just turned 7. I'm waiting till it's in junior high.
I see. But you know, through Twitter, I have a developing following, I hope, and to whom I tweet my reviews. We engage in conversations. They're really not I mean, to some degree, it's legitimized by being at the organizations we're at. But more and more, it becomes sort of identified with your Twitter handle or your Facebook page.
Well, your personality.
And your personality. So these two things are sort of colliding and coming apart. I wonder what would happen, say, if we were totally divorced from our institutions, whether we would have the kind, maybe, you know, you lose half your followers online. I don't know. But I think that those things are all in flux.
How do your editors feel about that?
That's a good question. Maybe they'll phone in if there was a phone-in show. They encourage, I'm sure you guys have the same thing, they encourage us to be on as many platforms as we can be. There are certain guidelines that are evolving in our business. It's still very fluid. What you can say, what you can't say. I stay away from, for example, politics. I don't really inject my political views online. I don't feel that's my purview. I really keep to a theater perspective. My editors want me out there. It's almost like, you know, it's like everything online is a digital bus with your face on it, you know, on the side.
I think that's definitely true. When I was at the Times, we definitely encouraged people. We wanted to require, but we encourage people to get out there on Twitter.
Amounts to the same thing, I'm sure.
Not in my case, but it's good because I think readers in general like to have the connection to the person. They don't like to be detached from, you know, this story, this article, this review. They want to feel like they know this person. And I think as a reviewer, a critic, it's good to develop those relationships. You want that following. You want people to read you.
I started following Elizabeth recently, and you know, it instantly drew me closer to her point of view. Just by having that connection, I suddenly became more aware of what fed your perspective. It was really helpful.
Yes.
And I mean, I've read you before that.
Because I tweet mostly about theater, but not just theater. I would say I also steer clear from politics, but I also tweet about culture and like entertainment in general. But usually with a theater link. For instance, if there's an actor that I particularly like who's popping up in a TV show, I'll write a little something, that kind of stuff. It's I find it really entertaining, actually. But I also like getting into arguments about what's going on. I think it's healthy. I think it's healthy. Maybe it's a French thing.
No, it is a good thing. I wish Charles was on Twitter.
Well, I will be out tomorrow, I think.
You will?
Well, I've had some reservations about it.
What are they, Charles?
Well, for one thing, I think that, you know, it thrives on spontaneity, and that gets people into a lot of trouble, and it's possible it could get me into a lot of trouble. Also, as theater critics, you know, very often we'll be seeing a show several days before it opens, and so we can't, you know, go out and write, say, some pithy remark about the show. What do you save that for 4 days later? And
these are the, I'm sorry, I don't mean to, but these are the things that before I started doing it, I worried about. And it took me a while to figure out what it was I wanted to do. It's really about a conversation with the people who follow you and talk to you. And you learn very quickly the things that you can and can't say. And even though it is very spontaneous, and yes, there are times when you get a little angry and you push the button before you should, but you learn, in a way, a tremendous amount of self-control. And I think you'd be great at it.
well, thank you. We'll see.
Self-control.
But I have a question.
I think Ben would be good at it too.
Yeah.
I just think, and it wouldn't. The other thing is, it doesn't have to be, you know, all your readers saying, you know, you suck or you're great. You know what I mean? You can actually control to a certain degree who's following you, so that you're not, if it's people who are hostile or abrasive and they're really
You
driving
can
you
block
crazy.
followers?
Yes.
Obviously, I know nothing about it. So,
Anyway,
how
I'll shut
often
up.
do you both tweet? I mean, do you feel the pressure to do it 4 times a day, 2 times a day?
I don't. I mean, there's days, for instance, when I'm on vacation or off, I don't tweet.
I'm
I
obsessed.
don't hardly
I'm
ever.
obsessed.
You are obsessed.
So, and I
I'm
also
obsessed.
have a dumb phone, so I do not tweet from my phone.
A dumb phone.
I have a
Well, that
helpful
could be
phone.
helpful in the sense
That's
that,
helpful.
you know,
It has become indispensable to my job. I can't see not doing it as well.
Why is it indispensable?
Because I have formed relationships, I don't mean personal relationships, but with the entire community I cover, the Washington community. I have learned things about what's going on so quickly. I now have access into so many levels, at a level levels that I wasn't really exploring, because I think it's more damaging to the public relations apparatus than it is to us, because we have now absolute unfettered connections to actors, directors, the ones who are mature enough to be able to do this in a way that it doesn't become hostile, or they can accept. But I learn things. I know what's going on.
It also came in really handy, for instance, during Sandy. Twitter was amazing during Sandy in terms of following which off-Broadway houses, many of which are downtown, were flooded or had problems. And that was a really interesting time for that. I was pretty, and of course I, joined fairly recently, just a few months ago. So, it's still baby steps, but I find it very enjoyable.
Lisa, you just saw Lucky Guy last night.
That's right.
And you tweeted, did you not?
I did tweet.
You did.
And did you have any parameters in terms of what you would treat and how you would treat tweeting two weeks before the show opened?
I tend not to give opinion when I see a show, unless it's opened. There have been reviews.
Did you buy a ticket?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that's different.
Yeah. No, I paid for my ticket, but I think that in general, I may say that I'm there. I may tweet that I am here at a particular show. I may tweet, or what I actually tweeted was a photo at the curtain call of Tom Hanks, I'm sorry. And
The Oscars didn't come in
you took a
dragging
picture.
you
I
out.
know. Patty LuPone didn't.
I know, look
emerge
at
from
all
nowhere
that.
and
No, it was
start
the curtain
scolding you.
call. It was the curtain call. Everyone was flashing. So, in their heads, you can't see a thing. No, in general, though, tweeting, I think it's still pretty new to theater, and especially with New York is kind of the exception because most places, I think, don't have that luxury of the 3 or 4 days before the actual opening. And so it's possible, I think, that as Twitter evolves as more of a medium for information, that they will follow the studio model, which is they have a no tweeting, no social media rule when you go to an early screening of a film.
Interesting. It seems almost impossible to control.
Right,
So that's
and really you can't control it. I mean, if somebody has seen the movie.
When people on the theater forums are
Yeah, of
going
course,
on and
of
on
course.
about shows in previews, often from the very first preview when a show can be really, really rough, you know, at the same time, they're charging full price for that. So,
Well, but I think the difference is with just somebody buying a ticket
Right.
versus a critic walking out and saying hated it. It's going to be a little bit different.
But that tends
yeah,
to
no.
put pressure on you when bloggers are buying tickets ahead of time and
Right.
blogging out there, and all these reviews are out there. I wanted just to pick up on something that you said, Peter, and that is you have this relationship with artists, actors, and so is that difficult to have?
Sometimes.
Does that compromise you?
No, I don't think it does compromise you if you learn how to handle it. I have had long-term kind of exchanges with people in the theater who I've then written reviews about, and sometimes not favorably. And it's like, I throw it out there and it's like, can you handle it? And I don't mean like in a challenge, but I find out. And some people can, and some people, you know, stop following you, and you know, the relationship ends. But it has also made me more sensitive to some of the issues in the theater that I wasn't quite as aware of, and that has been really helpful to me in writing the reviews. So so the trade-off is, yes, it makes it there are uncomfortable moments when you know, oh my God, that person's following me. I try not to be online if I know somebody is a follower. I would probably, as you would in conversation with anybody, be a little more diplomatic than I might be in the quiet room of writing my review, where I have to really sort of lay it out.
For me, my rule is I will not write or tweet anything that I would not say to someone in person. And that is a very good rule.
That's a nice, yeah, I think that's...
If I can't tell that person
Right.
face to face, I
Right.
am not going to write it. It's
Yeah.
cowardly. It's just really kind of pathetic, I think. Pretty much everything I write, I would absolutely
Yeah,
100%
that's a good-
tell that person
I think that's-
face to face.
Right.
Well, the
And
thing
if
with
you can
Twitter,
go
though,
by that, I think if more people did that, it would be a very different Twitter out there. But that's my bottom line.
but Twitter is open to everyone. You know, it's not just your followers who are
Right.
reading
Right.
you.
True.
So,
Right.
True.
so in a way, you do want to be careful about what you're
Right.
tweeting
Right.
and the opinions that you put out there, or the comments that
But
you
I
make.
think that face-to-face thing, it's very easy to remember. You reread it and it's like, would I tell someone this?
Charles, you had a point.
Well, I just worry that it's hard for me to picture having two different personas as a writer, I guess, in a sense. Like, the one where I'm writing my review and it's, completely not considering how this review is going to affect anyone or who's going to even be reading it. But then would I be able to be a completely different, more diplomatic, whatever person, if I know these people are somebody who I'm going to be hearing from on Twitter the next day? That's
You know what the answer is? It's not for everybody. I think you'd be good at it, but that said, it's not for everybody. And if you feel that, you might feel constrained. And maybe, the pressure of the New York Times and knowing that there's a different kind of commercial impulse that, people feel, you feel like people are waiting at their phones to buy their tickets. If that bothers you that much, then you would have, it might not be that much fun.
But Charles, I sense that there is two different personas between your talkbacks and your reviews.
Well, I think
That's
you
interesting.
may be right. I mean,
That's a good point.
we're encouraged to be a little more brief, more off the cuff. Not that I ever succeed in being brief, but never mind. A little more off the cuff, maybe a little bit. I don't want to say racier, but exploring different things as opposed to just writing a review.
But I remember that when you wrote about not being able to or not wanting to review Adam Rat plays anymore.
Right.
That stimulated a huge discussion.
Was picked up everywhere, and that to me feel very Twitterish in
Correct.
spirit.
Absolutely.
In spirit.
That's true. It was not something that it would have
So-
occurred to me just to write as a critic's notebook in
Right.
the paper.
And I for one wanted to talk to you about it somewhere.
Go ahead.
Well, I don't. At the time,
I don't even remember what the hell I wrote.
You basically
I said enough already.
Well, you said it publicly. I mean, you said a feeling that many of us have, but you actually articulated it, which is actually interesting because on Twitter, one might not have said, I mean, unless you really were, revealing everything about yourself. So that was an incredibly revealing moment. I think the repercussions were something that I wanted to discuss with you because I think it did have repercussions for that playwright, for you to say that was, to his career, I think that was a difficult moment because, not so much because I think you wanted to be fair to him in one way. On the other hand, it
I
was like
did.
saying, he's not even worth my time at this point. Somebody else do him. And so you left that out there on the table, and I think that was something that you might have wanted to even explain a little bit more because people were angry.
Well, because I'm not reading 133 blogs, I don't. Of course, I got a lot of flack, and I got a lot of positive support too, as you usually do in these things.
Right.
What I really want to emphasize in that piece, which obviously it's not always. You're not always able to do this. I mean, you do want to draw the veil out from behind the sort of mysterious doings of a critic. But really, I wanted, the honest impulse behind that was not to put a nail in the coffin of this guy's career by any means. It was, I really felt that it was no longer fair for a single voice at the New York Times, which still has a certain, authority, to be weighing in on his plays every time when it's a personal, viewing is subjective. And I honestly was not meant to be, something intended to, in any way put a damper on his career, and I'm sure ultimately it won't. But it was really meant to, free him up from having to face yet another.
But it would have been the same if you had not said it. It would have had the same effect. See, that once you put it down once you articulated that point of view, you were setting a ground. You were laying a foundation for how he was going to be covered that no other playwright has to deal with, which is because you know what I mean. Those things are discussed between among the people at the paper, not normally in. So I'm just saying.
Possibly, but I feel
But that's healthy, I think. I think, to some extent, in terms of exposing it. I think it's become much more democratic of an exercise because you are much more exposed than you ever have been before. Before there might be a letter that came to the editor and it may or may not be printed. Now you get your response right away.
Right.
Do you feel exposed more than ever? And how does that make you feel, and how do you respond to it emotionally in terms of your own personal life and career?
with lots of Xanax. You do feel exposed because now our reviews are not all reviews, but some of them are open. You're just open to a lot of vituperative comments that are just as public as your reviews or whatever essay you're writing. I mean, a friend of mine who's also a critic says he gets very angry because he feels that these comments are just thoughtless graffiti scrawled upon his review. And
that's a good description.
And I also worry that it's under in a sense the publication that is presenting your opinion is in a way backing away from it by then saying, well, everyone else have at him, It's, and I know that that's flying in the face of what we're supposed to be doing. It's supposed to be, everyone should have an equal voice these days, but I do think that critics work hard at their jobs, have a lot of experience covering theater, and this idea that, well, that's one opinion and here are 200 people who disagree, it's a little bit disheartening at times. Not that I ever read them.
Does that affect you as you're writing? In the writing process?
No,
are you
that's
thinking
why I
this is
try
gonna
not to
tick
read
people
them.
off?
So, I mean, do you read all the comments?
No, I can't. Because the comments are so, at least I find, so unregulated. I mean, there's nobody monitoring to see the truly bilious things that people write, and I can't. It's almost like it's too much. I don't understand why the most reputable organizations allow the least reputable comments. It makes no sense to me why these two things merge.
But isn't it
Well, I think the
self-policing a bit?
Well, I think the Times does monitor. Your paper does not
Yes,
monitor?
they do, but I see all
I know.
I see all kinds of things get through, and I mean, I maybe less so at the Times than at the Post, but not the New York Post, the Washington Post.
Right.
Lisa, I wanted to ask you, just backing up a little bit. 6, I think, of the 27 critics of the New York Drama Critics Circle Award blog. Would you think that all of them should blog? All 27 should blog? Should every critic blog? In your opinion?
Should every critic blog? I think only the only people who should be blogging are the people who have something to say. There are a lot of people who are just blogging to, throw things out there and see what sticks. I think it's helpful when, you guys are actually blogging, because that gives, I think, it gives it a little more credibility. It also helps explain things because you are maybe more informed than just Joe Blogger, not necessarily the members of the drama critics, but just in general. You are also tied to institutions. Even with the Adam Rapp thing, it still is an informed opinion, your feeling, and it explains. It does. It pulls back the curtain and helps people understand what you do a lot more than if you hadn't done that.
There was.
I also know you, Lisa, to be an insatiable collector of content. What do you read of the theater blogs, and do you go first to the mainstream critics, the newspaper critics, and then down? Because I think you only have so much time, right? In terms of consuming all this stuff?
No, that's true. Because I come from a newspaper background, obviously that's where I go first and foremost. And I do tend to read when I'm looking at, like anyone else, do I want to see that show? I do look at the critics at the main newspapers, possibly magazines, if there are a few that still have theater critics, and I just find them to be more in line with my way of thinking, and that tends to be how people read. I mean, for entertainment, I may read some of the other people out there. But if I'm actually trying to decide what I want to see or what I want to cover or things like that, I'm probably going to go a little more mainstream.
You've brought up a good point, which is the internal debate that's always been, that's an ongoing debate about theater criticism is, are you there to offer consumer advice? Should I spend $155 on this ticket? Or are you there to protect, enhance, encourage the art form itself? How has social media influenced that debate, in your opinion?
I think for me it's a three-part thing. It's, yes, there is an aspect, there's a consumer guide aspect, because it's often an expensive ticket.
Yeah.
And people, before pulling the trigger, they want to know, and I think it's fair enough, it's there. So there's that. Then there's there is trying to help the art form and maybe give some kind of constructive feedback to the creative team. I mean, why not, And one of the new things with the social media is the connection with the creatives is often very direct. I've gotten emails from playwrights who did not appreciate what I wrote, and I write back. I answer, if an email is polite, I write back, and it's been very interesting, actually, very constructive, I would say. So I think that's new, at least as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, I think it's part of the responsibility to kind of, that's the balancing act, is serving those three elements. It's difficult, it's tricky.
Peter, how's it affect?
I would say, and I'd be curious to know what you guys think. My reviewing has not changed at all in this. I try to write exactly the way I sort of evolved the style. I don't know that that it's changed at all as a result of social media. Some of the stories I've written have been affected by social media, the things I write about. And I have found, because I am so Twitter-centric, and this community has sort of evolved of mostly serious theater people. That's sort of the world and I don't mean just serious by, people in important jobs, but people who really want to talk about the theater. That world has sort of forced me to become a little more analytical, I think, as opposed to, do you like it or not? Because you know what? That's a boring subject. somebody saying, the worst things you get are the emails, or I get, that say, you like the show. I didn't. Well, okay, what am I supposed to do about it? Am I supposed to say, I'm sorry, I liked it? You're right. You're right. You liked it, therefore you hated it, you're right. I mean, there's no conversation really about that. You really have to talk about the themes and the ideas and what they're trying to get at and why. That's what happens, and that's what happens via Twitter. So even though, yes, you've got to still be you can't back away from should they go or not. You have got to, that's what we're there for at some level. That's why our newspapers have us there, to share our feeling about that. But more than that, I think what's happening is through these conversations online, I'm getting more of a feel for what things people want to hear about and talk.
Charles, you were instrumental in championing careers, championing playwrights like Sarah Rule, Tom Paine. Tell me
Willino.
Thank you very much, Willino. Has social media made it easier for you to champion these?
Well, I mean, I
playwrights?
don't, oh God, here I go again, the Luddite. I don't,
Yes, go,
I don't
go.
tweet my reviews, and I don't go on Facebook. And I feel like my review is in itself, has to speak for itself. One thing I think that, ultimately a review is a personal opinion, but I'm sometimes aware that there are playwrights whose style is not going to appeal to everyone. And I think an important part of a review should always be just to give a sense of what the experience of the show is, and so that people can glean from what you're describing, what the thing actually is, as opposed to like, this is brilliant, and here's why, and these are my deep thoughts about it. At the same time, you want to, like with an Annie Baker play, you need to make it clear that this is not a tautly constructed, quick fire piece of theater. It's something that you need to have a particular appreciation for the kind of atmosphere she's trying to set, the things she's trying to do. So that's always hard for me, because you want to sometimes obviously, talk about how moving this was for you, but I do think you have to at least make it clear what the actual theater-going experience.
Yeah, I think that's what I meant by consumer guide. It's not like a thumbs up, thumbs down thing. It's more like, this is what you're going to get. For me, a good example right now is that play Jackie by Elfriede Jelinek, which is a pretty difficult play. I mean, I really liked it, but I really made clear this is really not easy, and there's no plot. It's all over the place. Don't expect going from point A to point B. It's really impressionistic. It's difficult, but if you're willing to kind of engage the world of the play, this kind of hermetic world, it's very rewarding. But not for everybody. But
there's no way that you could take the plays of Annie Baker or Will Eno or this playwright down to a 140 character tweet in some way in order to say, watch out for this playwright. He really deserves
you can tweet.
You can do that.
You can also use a tweet to amplify, to bring attention to your review, saying, hey, I just reviewed this. It's not for, you can try to kind of.
You can put your review in a context, I suppose.
Right.
In that.
But it's also it's like a zipper, a news zipper. I mean, you can embellish over a series of conversations with people over a series of a day. There are whole functions online called like Storify, where people will take your tweets, or the conversations you're having, over a period of 24 hours and condense them into one sort of readable format, so that everyone else can follow along what was said. So it's not just like you can pronounce one 140 character tweet. That's what I think about this. You can link in a tweet to your review and say, somehow encapsulate it there, and then maybe an hour later say, there's more to say about this important playwright. You guys, and if you've got, several thousand people following you, sometimes the echo chamber works, and it actually has impact. I've had people in Washington, based on a tweet, which drives me crazy, write condemning blogs about what I said. I mean, whole articles based on a tweet. So I mean, it does happen works in mysterious ways sometimes.
Do you resent when websites
Yes.
like
I don't know what the question is.
I know.
Resents. He just resents. That's what he's saying.
I'm joking.
Stuff like didhelikeit.com or Stage Grade, they reduce your reviews to an A or a B, a thumbs up, a sideways, or a down. Do you feel
I
that
don't
that's
think. I
simplifying
think
it?
that's serving a certain audience who obviously doesn't have the time or the inclination to actually read reviews. I mean, it's gonna. I don't resent it. I mean, it's obviously
You just
a
fi-
gross
you ever-
simplification of.
I really like Stage Grade. I think it's great. So
I sort of like it.
You like it?
I really like
Well, I don't. I mean, the one that did he like it thing seems. I don't
know what
look
that
at that
is.
one, but I look at Stage Grade because I think it's interesting the way that.
it's very useful. And actually, I engage with them because I check out how they summarize and the grade they give to what I've written. I mean, they don't give a grade to my review. They kind of
Well, they say what grade you would have
They kind
given.
of assume, right, exactly. And I very often have emailed them saying, actually, I don't think this would be a C+.
You correct them.
why.
You mean before or after they? grade
After,
it?
because they don't consult with you before they
Right, right.
vote it.
So
But
I see.
I check it out and then
That's
I
cool.
double check, and they've usually
Changed it?
And they change it.
Yes.
And they change it.
And I explain
you use
why. I
stars
think-
too. I think it would be easier to translate your reviews into grade.
Yeah, because I have to use stars, but no, it's not easier. it's really tricky. Like, so I have 4 stars, and I can use half stars.
Yeah.
So the average is a 2-star, which for me is actually below average.
Right.
So you're right. So
But
it's an A, B,
it's
C, D,
tricky. It just doesn't quite work. But yeah, I engage with them. I love Stage Grade. I think it's a great instrument.
With bloggers out there buying tickets, going early, filing reviews, do you get pressure from your editors to somehow jump the gun? Do you have a real problem now with the traditional embargo that was supposed to level the playing field and now hasn't leveled the playing field? If anything, it's made it much more screwy or skewed. Do you get pressure from your editors about jumping into the game earlier? Do you feel that you can still abide by the embargo? Do you feel it's unfair for them to ask you to abide by the embargo?
Well, I think it's getting more complicated because producers now realize that they can generate, when you have a star in your show or something like Spider-Man that has a built-in audience, they can generate enough excitement in the Twitter sphere and through Facebook and social media that they're now more bold, I think, about saying, well, we're not going to bring the critics in, for what, they make up an excuse, whether it was, Sandy, which was shameless, but never mind. I think, and of course it's
Oh,
only
you talking about Glenn Ross?
Yeah, exactly.
Which you wrote about.
It's
right?
it's only happened a couple of times, but I think there's a danger there. And then suddenly, are the critics going to be the last ones to the party, and therefore, are our opinions going to be devalued? I mean, that's a question we have to start thinking about a little more, maybe, or editors do.
I'm watching this world sort of still evolve, and I still think the moment when Elizabeth or Charles, when their review comes out, that's the moment. I still think
I
that
agree with that.
we're still there. It hasn't become, I thought this was all going to change and that, people were going to be like, aggregating 40,000 comments and therefore that was, it would come up with a numerical grade and it hasn't happened. It's still the voices that have authority and cleverness and knowledge and taste that drive the audience and discussion.
No,
maybe not ticket sales, but certainly those other things.
I definitely agree with that, and for
Rah,
the
rah.
many years, for the many years that I was an editor at the LA Times, there really wasn't a push to break an embargo. Certainly, there was that talk. Exactly what you're talking about. There's so many voices out there, but I agree with Peter. It's the one voice that you want to hear. In the end, ultimately, are the professionals. You can hear all sorts of
And that
noise
other
out
world.
there.
All those people at their computers are waiting for something to react against. They need
they
a
are.
conversation starter.
They are.
It's very hard for people out there to be. Maybe we'll build to that. Maybe there will be people who have those kind of audiences someday in the theater. I don't see it happening as yet. It hasn't happened
Sure,
as yet.
but the same thing's happening. Again, movies. That's always been the case. That people see things, at screenings and special screenings, and hear this and that, and obviously bloggers are out there posting right away. But critics have to hold to those embargoes, and in the end, they're still going to want to read Tony Scott's review. They're still going to want to read Ken Turan.
What people are buying from you, what people want from you, obviously, is judgment. That's what they're buying, your critical judgment, your critical evaluation, these years that you've put into it. And yet, it seems to me, because of the social media, the definition of what a critic is and who is a critic is getting much more porous. Do you feel that the public, the lay public, is being able to make those kind of distinctions and judgments? Or is it becoming more confusing?
I think that there are a lot of voices out there. I mean, no one can deny that, the power of Yelp, for example, in, this is my neighbor talking. Here's the critic and here's my neighbor. I know my neighbor. I respect my neighbor. We've gone out to dinner together. So I think I'm going to go with this opinion over here. No, it's interesting to kind of watch the evolution of that. We don't have a critic, so what we do, and I actually started at the LA Times, is Broadway roundups. What did the critics say?
The aggregate, the Rotten Tomatoes version of theater.
Exactly. And so it may start with the local critic, when I was at the Times, and then kind of break down everyone else, what everyone else had to say. So the reader can stop in one place and get the range of opinions out there. And I'll tell you, those things were huge traffic drivers.
More so than, say, the review, the printed review. How can you give us can you quantify how many page views your printed review got versus how many page views the aggregate got?
I can, and since we're not seen in Los Angeles, it was sometimes, as many, in some cases, 10 times as many page views for the aggregated thing, because people want an overall view of this. They like to hear many decisions, and I mean, think about buying a car. You read this thing, you read this, and then you kind of form your own opinion, or you just are entertained by the way people write, and so often, I mean, those were big page drivers. Yeah, traffic drivers, and much more so. And each one of those things did include a link to the full review. So we're doing kind of a money quote out of those things, or a little quote or two from each of the reviews. And they did include, and we could track how many people actually clicked on. And so we could see where they were going with the reviews. And in a way, it's a little bit about who we, the quote that we chose. So if there's a particularly,
inflammatory?
Could be inflammatory, or just
provocative.
Pithy,
yeah, something, or maybe it's a funny moment or something, they will click on that. And so, again, those are things that you think about as somebody who's aggregating a bit, what we're offering to the reader.
Charles, what were you going to say?
Well, I've been, struggling in the past few years about this question of how people read differently online as opposed to the paper. And I feel like, at least at first, I think it may be evolving now that more and more people have, readers that they can take with them and read more at a leisurely pace, not just, you're in your job and you want to check something out, you read 2 graphs. At first I really felt like readers who would get a wrong impression of a review I'd written, they'd say to me like, oh, I heard you hated that show, and of course, I didn't hate it at all, in fact, and I'd ask them where they read it. Well, I read it online, and people are online at least, several years ago, seemed to be looking for information, like it wasn't quite as thorough a read that you get in the paper, but I think perhaps that's changing. Do you guys get any sense that there's a difference between the way people react to reviews if they read them online?
I haven't had that experience personally, so I don't.
And I've evolved into an online reader. I don't read papers anymore.
And do you read as thoroughly online?
Yes, completely, and more so.
So we have a Bible, so we can.
No, I don't like jumps. I hate jumps.
Actually, readership.
No, you don't. You can press full page. And I just
really?
read. Yes.
You have that on your own site.
You learned something.
No, I know that.
No,
what, I'm sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
No, I was just going to say, actually, we also did, when I was at the Times, there were studies of whether they actually go to the jump. And so it's not that unusual that people only read what's on the front page.
No, that's true.
And so I think people do read all the way through. I really do, because you can actually track that on your site.
Oh, really?
So Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
I'm just glad I don't have that
Yeah.
information. They don't tell me.
No, I mean, you can see what they're reading. You can see the amount of time spent on what you put up there, and you can see where they go after that.
What it does give you the opportunity, Charles, is to correct that person's opinion who says that you didn't like this, but in fact you did. You have an opportunity or a platform to correct that impression.
Well, that's maybe what I'll start doing on Twitter.
But I think you're right, though. I think that people do look at even what we do, the aggregations, and they see the soundbite, the quick summary, and it doesn't carry the nuance. I liked this except for,
But the history of theater reviewing was always first graph, last graph. I mean,
It's
people would
true.
read your first paragraph and your last paragraph. I mean, I don't think it's really.
You don't think it's changed?
No, not really. I mean, I tend now. I find that I've just gravitated now to the web. It's just now my natural place to read things. But I don't think my habit has changed that much.
In the time that we have left, I want to talk a little bit about the influence of bloggers, if at all. Let's call it the Michael Riedel effect. And he's not a blogger necessarily, but he does have a huge influence on these conversations that get generated on the internet, on chat rooms. Do you feel compelled, some reviewers and the reviews that I've read do feel compelled to say, there's been a lot of heat on the chat rooms. You may have heard that Bernadette Peters or whoever, whatever actor. Do you feel compelled to address the buzz because it is so prevalent now in your reviews at any time?
I think that's a slippery slope. I mean, if you suddenly start reacting to whatever's out there before you're, sitting down to, I don't know, I don't think I've ever done that. I mean, of course, you read Riedel and you're aware, but you have to go in there and try to, keep your mind blank. Whether that's actually possible, I don't know. But I tend not to. On rare occasions, maybe I've alluded when it's something really notable that's caused such a stir that it's made its way, let's say, into the pages of the Times.
I'm
Like
not
Rebecca,
sure.
if Rebecca was
Rebecca,
reviewed.
Right,
Yeah,
or I'm not sure we can talk about orphans without mentioning the
Right.
cast
Shia.
change.
Right.
That's interesting.
Clearly,
Yes.
that's part of it.
Right.
I mean, you're not going to. It's not a huge part
Absolutely
of the review,
right.
but it would be insane not to mention it. I mean, you cannot not mention it.
But what would you say other than who replaced Charlotte? You're not
That-
going to
that-
refer to the
right, exactly.
acrimony that supposedly took place in the room.
No.
so
That's
it's
all I mean is that
Yeah.
you just mentioned that maybe that had a kind of hectic, or but it's not. You don't make a point of it. But I think you do have to mention it.
Well, here's the question. It's like, if the conversation before the reviews, has it ever built to the point where it's reached, this show sucks, and then you come in, do you have to do the corrective and say, online, everyone the consensus is it was a disaster. Well, you know what? It's not a disaster. It's actually quite, what I'm saying? Is that
Yeah.
ever
I don't
happened?
do that. I don't,
yeah,
no.
I'm trying to think. Spider-Man? I mean, I don't know.
Spider-Man was its own.
Yeah, that was its own sort of
own
soap opera.
thing.
Right. But
that
I
was
don't know
an
if we've gotten to
extreme
that
case.
point yet.
Yeah, I
I
think,
don't think so.
Michael's tried to do that.
yes, I think so.
Michael's tried to do that.
I mean, how has the Michael Riedels or the bloggers sort of influenced criticism, in your opinion, Lisa? You can look at it from outside.
Yeah, I
Bailey
actually don't see that. It's not visible in the reviews. It may be affecting what you're thinking going into it, but I'm not seeing that in the reviews themselves as a reader of the reviews.
It's also not a new thing. There's always been gossip columnists and people who are, like to stir things up. I mean, there's not a new thing.
Well,
So
the other interesting question is whether we're reading more about what's happening in terms of opinion formation before we go in than we are. We're not in Skinner boxes. We go in with some sense, and not just from friends going, "Hey, I saw it already." Don't you? But I mean, it's like now, do we absorb so much of what's happening in the environment? I don't know. I
Good
mean,
question.
know-
Who reads all that chat?
I read it.
You read it? And do you read Broadway World chat
I don't read
rooms as well?
everything. I don't read everything. I kind of like scan the headlines. I don't necessarily go into the messages, the posts. So I'll scan to see what people are talking about. If there's like a 25 exchange discussion about something, I'm not going to read it, but I'm like, oh, interesting. They're talking about orphans.
Well,
Do you
shows are
wanna
now
go on?
tweeting. Shows are like will start tweeting the responses that people have to their shows, like in the early previews, everywhere, Washington, New York, everywhere.
I don't
And they'll-
follow shows, actually.
What?
I don't follow shows.
I do, and I obviously, if it's tweeted by the show, it's going to be positive. But sometimes it's somebody you know, or it's an actor you know, and you go, why are they doing that? You know, well, do they know somebody in the show, or is this really something they wanted to say? So I am aware much more of that, and they tend to be positive. You don't hear a lot of, ugh, you know, that much early on when people are tweeting, because they want to be retweeted, and I think they think that they're going to be more, they're going to get more currency for their point of view if they say something positive.
Well, I also think it's the think, you know, would you say it to them in person?
Yes, right.
And
Because your name's attached to it.
Exactly, exactly. And a lot of people were raised, if you can't say something nice, don't say it at all.
Right.
Charles, how do you answer Peter's question? The question that is about how much you read of what's out there. How much do you read of bloggers, chat rooms?
I don't read a lot. I try not to read a lot in advance. You know, I don't read all that chat. I'm not a masochist. And I also feel that, you know, there's very passionate people on some of these sites, but they're not necessarily people who I would
Trust.
Yeah, so, you know, have respect for their opinions, you know, as I say, passionate though they are. But also I do feel if you read too much of that, it does poison your,
Yes.
I would
you know, because
say,
it's always, you know, the first preview, there's always people going, and, you know, the second preview, and if you start getting it in your head, then you have to try to somehow, you know,
Push it out again.
download it or offload, whatever the technical phrase would be. And that's harder to do if you have all that in your head. So I don't read that much before I see a show at all. And
Although I read something today that said TV ratings go up for shows that have more tweets about them. So there is a correlation happening between like shows thinking if you tweet more about it, you'll get more audience. I mean, there's something happening, you know, that we can't help but acknowledge or be watching for. That, you know, that these things are happening if you're, you know, if you're online doing this stuff, and how that might affect you if you're seeing a barrage of tweets from Hands on a Hard Body, for example, or something like that. That, you know, you go, oh well, boy, there are a lot of people who seem to like that show.
Wasn't that Next to Normal's big thing?
Next Normal was
They were one of the very
Yes,
early
yes.
Twitter
Yes.
people who created buzz that way
Yeah.
and got conversations going and expanded them beyond just the show. So I think that is something that from the other side, the producer, the marketing side of things, people are looking to do because they do want people to be talking about their show and maybe even have those mixed opinions. Decide for yourself. Come see our show.
And to get around you guys.
neutralize. the
Exactly.
You know,
critics,
to
yes.
neutralize the
Indeed,
critics.
of
you know.
course.
Absolutely.
Do a, you know, and run around you. That's the whole marketing push.
Of course, you can do it the old-fashioned way. They did with Breakfast at Tiffany's, plant a lot of stories about the cat. The cat
like the
probably has
cat.
a Twitter.
Got the best review.
They would be
And the
stupid
cat,
if they
the
didn't.
cat
I
got
know.
fired. Didn't the cat get fired?
Well, yeah, another
Understood.
You got another cat?
They got
old
another
school
cat.
PR
Under-
thing.
A producer came up to me last night, a producer whose show has yet to open in 3 weeks' time, or 3 weeks' time, and came up to me and said, people come up to me all the time and said, I read your good reviews, or I read your reviews about your shows. From people, because they've read it in this chat room, this blogosphere that you were talking about. Do you sense a diminution of your own power? I know that you don't think that you're powerful, but you are. You influence people, your reviews sell or do not sell tickets. Do you feel a diminution of your power, and do you resent that?
I think people who are really passionate about theater are going to be searching out, you know, opinions on shows all over the place. So there certainly is that small group of people who, you know, are going to be reading everything. I think the general readership, I think still, or the general population still probably has a certain amount of, I mean, it's easier for them to just wait for the critics, you know, to weigh in. But I do think, you know, everyone would agree that papers don't have the influence they used to because readership is declining. This is getting depressing. You say something.
I resent people throwing it in my face. I don't care that much whether or not the tickets sell or don't. I know, but I can't stand that people go, you're less important because you're not selling that many tickets. Well, what do I?
Right.
I don't care. You know, you want to make me feel bad? Is that all you want to do? Fine. I mean, I didn't get into this because I wanted, you know, thousands of people to gallop into the theater because I said to go or not. It really was never in my. That was not an impulse that I wanted to pursue. You know, so.
But you do want to champion.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
was
want
going
people
to
to,
say,
of course, but I don't
I-
care. It's not about power. It's not about power.
There is power to that, though.
Well, the one
You
thing
say
that makes,
this is good, and you know people.
the one thing that makes me wistful is like I don't care if I don't have the power to close a show, but I would really, I really would love to have the power to keep a show that I love going.
Exactly.
That I would love to have that power. If I could have a superpower, that would be my my
I think
one.
that's
I really
still-
don't want to close a show, but I want to keep one going.
I think that's still true. Don't you think, Lisa?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's the one, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, the recent,
Yeah. Yeah.
that did get very good reviews and playing to half full auditorium. It's sad.
There's a-
Um,
Yeah, there's a lot of different extenuating factors to
Sure,
that,
absolutely.
because
Of course.
it had been here
Show.
recently.
Of course, yeah,
It
yeah.
had also been here recently.
And also played to have how the other production.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, and this didn't have stars. I mean, I think what I find dispiriting is that, it's impossible to do much for their off-Broadway shows, which are usually ones we care more about,
Exactly.
because there's
Right.
nowhere for them to go. They can extend for 2 weeks, and then the nonprofit has another show coming in. There's nowhere for them to go. I mean, Broadway can market its way around reviews to a certain degree.
But the reviews also, because of this digital world, have impacts that go way beyond the run of the show. There's all other kinds of ancillary effects. The career of that playwright is going to be enhanced, and that show is going to get run, is going to be seen in 20 different cities. I mean, it's not just about keeping a show open.
What are you sanguine about in terms of the future and your role as a theater critic in terms of the future of theater criticism? What are you positive about in terms of where we will be 10 years from now or 5 years from now and your role in it?
Well, if I'm going to be positive, I do think there's so much out there. There's so much offer, and even in the past few years, it's just it's grown. It's just here in New York at such a pace that to have someone has a full-time job that consists only of going to the theater is pretty important, because I have a benchmark. Last year, I saw like 220 shows.
Phew.
And
Wow.
I see a lot of stuff, and I have these benchmarks where I can tell people, check this out. I mean, I see a lot of stuff, and this is worth it. This is good. You're gonna like this. Well, this may not be and I think it's important to have someone who's paid to go through. You have to kiss a lot of frogs, basically, and someone has to be willing and paid full time to do it. It's not easy.
Peter?
Oh, what Elizabeth said.
Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's
Just kiss those frogs.
well, that there's going to be a need for someone to go see this stuff, and that's what's going to, and that need's going to be filled somehow. Maybe not by someone one
With
person.
knowledge and experience.
or with
and
or,
judgment.
or health coverage.
Charles?
Well, looking at the social media aspect, I mean, from hearing mainly from what you guys have talked about, I think it is encouraging that maybe, people who are so connected on social media will be able to maybe be exposed to more stuff about theater that they normally, if they don't actually care about theater, but they're on Facebook and a friend of theirs posts something about a show, hey, maybe I will go see the show, even though it's $75. So maybe there's an aspect that it'll start trickling out in ways and more people will become exposed to it, and as opposed to the people who, are the average age of theater goers today. Younger people are much more on these social media, so maybe that'll help develop new audiences.
Good point. Lisa, you get the final word.
No, I was just going to agree with Charles. I think that social media, the internet has brought all of you to the world, really, where you weren't before, and it has inspired people. I will tell you that just looking at audiences and how if you sit in an audience where you're not there on press night and listen to what people are saying, I happen to hear about it through, or this review or something else, and I never go to the theater. I never go here. So it is reaching out to more people and growing audiences, and I think that's what it's all about.
Well, thank you all for a most stimulating discussion. Hope to see you again soon. And thank you for joining us. These programs are brought to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York in partnership with our friends at CUNY TV. On behalf of the American Theater Wing, I'm Patrick Pacheco, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Working in the Theater.